The Galactic Council chambers floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of glass and steel. Inside the massive hall, representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections. Some breathed oxygen like the humans once did. Others required methane or sulfur compounds. The chamber accommodated them all with separate atmospheric zones and translation devices that turned clicks, whistles, and rumbles into understandable speech. Council Director Velshara stood at the central podium, her blue-scaled skin reflecting the light from the projection screens around her. She was Krithian, a species known for their administrative excellence and pride in organizational systems. Today marked exactly 300 years since the Galactic Council had last experienced a major conflict between member species. 300 years of peace. 300 years of prosperity. This achievement belongs to all of us, Velshara announced, her voice carrying through the translation system. Every species has contributed to this golden age of cooperation. The representatives made their species-specific sounds of approval. The Vorlons hummed in their deep bass tones. The Sethians clicked their mandibles rhythmically. The older species, the ones who remembered the wars before the council, swayed their bodies in ancient gestures of satisfaction. Velshara moved through the agenda efficiently. Trade agreements between the Vorlon manufacturing worlds and Sethian agricultural colonies. Resource allocation for expanding the Deep Space Monitoring Network. Approval of new medical research facilities on the joint science stations. Everything functioned smoothly, like a machine with well-oiled parts. Then came the requisition requests from frontier stations. Velshara scrolled through them quickly on her datapad. Most were routine, but one made her pause. Request Sigma 774, she read aloud. Human personnel on Station Kaiser 7 requesting upgraded life support monitoring systems. Increased hazard compensation for radiation exposure zones. And additional personnel to reduce shift lengths from 14 hours to 10 hours. She looked up at the council chamber. The current systems are adequate. The compensation meets minimum galactic standards. The request is denied due to budget constraints. A few representatives shifted in their seats, but no one objected. It was a minor matter. Humans had been filing these requests for decades. They were always asking for upgrades, better conditions, more resources. But the stations ran fine. The work got done. There was no crisis. What Velshara did not see, what none of the council saw, were the humans themselves. They did not attend council sessions. Humans held no seats in the Great Chamber. They were not ambassadors or politicians or military commanders. They were the people who kept the stations running, who fixed the machines when they broke, who grew the food on difficult colony worlds, who coordinated the supply lines that fed billions. On Station Kaiser 7, Marcus Webb finished reading the decision on his datapad. He sat in the maintenance office, a cramped room filled with diagnostic equipment and spare parts. His uniform was stained with hydraulic fluid from the morning's repair work on the water recycling system. He was 43 years old and had not seen Earth in 15 years. Marcus had grown up on Earth, in the North American sector, in a city by a great lake. He remembered real weather, real rain, real wind. He remembered his daughter's face before the cancer took her, before he took this job to pay the medical bills that came too late. His wife had divorced him 7 years ago. She said he chose the station over their marriage. Maybe she was right. He maintained the life support systems for 200,000 residents on Kaiser 7. The station was old, built 150 years ago when human engineering was still new to the galactic community. The original designers had not accounted for the thermal expansion differences between human-made components and Vorlon power systems. Marcus had spent 5 years figuring out how to make them work together without the entire system failing every few months. His datapad chimed. an encrypted message. He opened it with his personal code. Protocol Exodus. 72 hours. Marcus stared at the words. He had known this message might come someday. All the humans scattered across Council space knew about Protocol Exodus. It was their contingency plan, developed quietly over decades, shared through encrypted networks that the Council never monitored because they never thought human maintenance workers would need secure communications. The plan was simple. Every human would resign, properly and professionally, and return to human-controlled space. No sabotage, no violence, no drama, just a quiet withdrawal. Marcus looked around his cramped office. He thought about the modifications he had made to the life support system, the small adjustments and compensations that kept it running smoothly. He had documented everything, written detailed reports, filed them in the station's database. Whoever replaced him would have access to all that information, but would they understand it? Would they see the patterns he had learned to recognize? Would they know that Pump 7 always ran 3 degrees hotter than specifications and needed to be monitored manually because the automatic sensors could not detect the variation? Would they understand why he had rerouted certain coolant lines in ways that violated the original design but prevented catastrophic failures? He began typing his resignation letter, professional, courteous, giving the required 2-week notice as per his contract. He would finish his current shift rotations. He would train whoever they assigned to replace him. He would do everything correctly, across the galaxy, on 47 Council worlds and 312 stations and outposts. Other humans received the same message. Sarah Chun, the agricultural specialist on Colony World Taros 3, read it while checking the nitrogen levels in the soil. David Okonkwo, the senior mediator at the Vorlon-Sethian Trade Commission, read it between negotiation sessions. The Yu Yan, the emergency response coordinator for Sector 9, read it while reviewing rescue protocols. 11,241 humans. They all read the message. They all began preparing to leave in the Council chambers. Valshar moved on to the next agenda item. Unaware that she had just set in motion the greatest crisis the Galactic Council would face in 300 years. She did not know that the quiet, unremarkable humans who maintained her civilization were about to show her exactly how valuable, unremarkable work could be. The meeting ended. The representatives returned to their quarters or their home worlds. The translation systems powered down. The lights in the great chamber dimmed and across the galaxy, humanity began its silent withdrawal. Marcus Webb worked his final shift on Station Kaiser 7 with the same attention to detail he had shown for 15 years. He arrived at 0600 hours, checked all the monitoring systems, and began his routine inspection of the life support infrastructure. The station hummed around him, alive with the sounds of air circulation, water processing, and power distribution. He had 48 hours left before his departure. His replacement, a Vorlon engineer named Thekmar, would arrive in 24 hours for training. Marcus had prepared a comprehensive handover document, 273 pages of detailed procedures, system specifications, and troubleshooting guides. What he could not put into the document was experience. He could not write down the feeling in his gut when Pump 7 was about to fail, the slight change in vibration that his hands had learned to detect. He could not explain in words why the coolant system needed to be checked every 6 hours instead of every 8, even though the official maintenance schedule said 8 was sufficient. On Colony World Taros 3, Sarah Chun walked through the agricultural fields one last time. The crops grew in neat rows under the artificial sun lamps, genetically modified plants that could survive in the thin atmosphere and poor soil. When she had arrived 8 years ago, the colony was failing. The Sethian agricultural specialists could not understand. Why their traditional farming methods did not work on this world. Sarah had studied the soil composition, the atmospheric pressure, the water pH levels. She had spent 6 months developing a new crop rotation system and modifying the irrigation schedule. Now the colony produced enough food to feed its population with surplus for trade. The Sethians thought she had simply followed better procedures. They did not understand that she had invented those procedures specifically for this world. Through trial and error and countless failed experiments that she had never reported, her replacement was already on world. A young Sethian named Cresseth, who had excellent academic credentials. Sarah had spent 3 days training her, showing her the irrigation schedules, the crop rotation patterns, the fertilizer mixtures. Cresseth was smart and asked good questions. She wrote everything down carefully. But when Sarah pointed out the slight discoloration in section 12 that indicated early mineral deficiency, Cresseth had not seen it. When Sarah mentioned that the humidity needed to be 0.3% higher during the third growth cycle, Cresseth had questioned whether such a small difference mattered. Sarah had smiled and said maybe it did not matter much. But she had not mentioned that the last time she let the humidity drift by that amount, she lost 12% of the crop. In the grand commercial hub of Sector 4. David Okonkwo sat across from the Vorlon Trade Minister and the Sethian Commerce Director. They were arguing again about tariff rates on manufactured goods. The Vorlons wanted to raise rates to protect their industrial base. The Sethians wanted to lower rates to access cheaper goods for their agricultural colonies. David had mediated disputes like this for 12 years. He knew both species well. He knew that the Vorlons valued honor and directness, but interpreted silence as agreement. He knew that the Sethians valued harmony and indirect communication, but interpreted compromise as weakness. He had learned to navigate between these different cultural frameworks, to find solutions that both sides could accept without losing face. Today's negotiation would be his last. His replacement, a Crithian diplomat named Sevthos, sat beside him observing. Sevthos was experienced and well-trained. He had studied both Vorlon and Sethian culture extensively. But when the Vorlon minister made an aggressive opening demand, Sevthos stiffened visibly. David had to gently remind him that this was normal Vorlon negotiating behavior, not a personal insult. The meeting ended with a temporary agreement, as most of David's meetings did. The real work happened in the small conversations afterward, the casual remarks that built trust over time. David had spent years building those relationships. Sevthos would have to start from the beginning. Across council space, the pattern repeated 11,241 times. Humans completed their final shifts, trained their replacements, and filed their resignation papers. The council's administrative system processed the resignations automatically. Some department heads noticed the unusual number of human departures, but humans had always had higher turnover rates than other species. They were restless, always moving, never quite settling into council society, the way other species did. Valshara received a summary report of the resignations on her datapad. She was in her office, reviewing budget allocations for the next fiscal cycle. The report noted that 11,241 human workers had resigned effective immediately or within the standard 2-week notice period. Replacement personnel had been assigned to all positions. She marked the report as reviewed and moved on to the next item. There was a proposal for expanding the medical research facilities, and she needed to analyze the cost projections before the next council session. What Valshara did not see in the report was the fragility it represented. She did not see that the replacement for Marcus Webb had excellent technical knowledge, but had never worked with hybrid human Vorlon systems. She did not see that the replacement for Sarah Chun understood Sethian agriculture, but had never adapted it to non-Sethian worlds. She did not see that the replacement for David Okonkwo had diplomatic training but no practical experience bridging fundamentally different cultural worldviews. The Galactic Council had existed for over 1,000 years before humans joined. It had developed sophisticated systems for managing multi-species cooperation. Those systems worked well when every species operated within their traditional roles. The Vorlons manufactured. The Sethians farmed. The Crithians administered. Each species did what they were naturally suited for. Humans had no natural role. They were adaptable, which meant they fit into the gaps between other species. They learned to work with Vorlon machines and Sethian biology and Crithian bureaucracy. They became translators, not just of language, but of entire ways of thinking and operating. The Council's systems did not account for the loss of translators. The replacement personnel were competent in their own species' methods. They followed the procedures humans had documented, but they did not understand why those procedures existed or when to deviate from them. On Station Kaiser 7, Marcus finished his final shift at 1800 hours. He met with Vecmer one last time, answered the Vorlons' remaining questions, and handed over his access codes. Vecmer thanked him formally, in the Vorlon way, with a precise bow that indicated professional respect. Marcus returned to his quarters and packed his few belongings. He had a transport leaving in 6 hours for the jump gate that led to human-controlled space. He sat on his bed and looked around the small room that had been his home for 15 years. He thought about his daughter, gone 12 years now. He thought about his ex-wife, remarried to someone who stayed on Earth. He thought about all the years he had spent keeping this station alive. Then he picked up his bag and left without looking back. Across the galaxy, 11,241 humans did the same. They boarded transports, passed through jump gates, and returned to human space. They left behind detailed documentation, trained replacements, and properly filed resignation papers. They left in silence, without speeches or demands or explanations. They simply left, and the Galactic Council, vast and ancient and proud, did not realize what it had lost. The first warning signs appeared within a week. On Station Kaiser 7, Vecmer noticed that Pump 7 was running slightly hotter than usual. He checked the monitoring system, which showed all temperatures within acceptable parameters. He checked Marcus Webb's documentation, which mentioned Pump 7, but only said to monitor it regularly. Vecmer made a note in his log and continued with his other duties. 3 weeks later, Pump 7 failed completely. The backup systems engaged automatically, but they were not designed to handle full load for extended periods. Vecmer worked frantically to repair the primary pump, following the technical manuals precisely. He did not understand why the pump had failed when all the monitoring data said it was functioning normally. He did not know that Marcus had learned to ignore the monitoring data for Pump 7 because it was calibrated incorrectly and that the manufacturer had discontinued the correct sensors 15 years ago. The repairs took 48 hours. During that time, the backup system strained under the load. On the second day, backup Pump 3 developed a crack in its housing. Coolant began leaking into the ventilation system. The automatic safety protocols shut down ventilation to Section 7, which housed 20,000 residents. The evacuation order came at 1400 hours. 20,000 people had 4 hours to gather their belongings and move to temporary housing in other sections of the station. The process was chaotic. The Vorlons moved slowly and methodically, which frustrated the Sethians who wanted to move quickly. The Crithians tried to organize everyone into orderly groups, which the free-spirited Telkari species found offensive. In the old base, human coordinators would have managed the different species, understanding each group's needs and communication styles. Now, station security simply shouted orders through translation devices, and everyone did their best to comply. The section was sealed. Repairs began, but the damage was spreading. The extra load on the other sections stressed systems that had been operating at capacity. Marcus Webb had known this and had carefully balanced the load across all sections to prevent cascading failures. Vecmer did not know this because it was not written in any manual. On Colony World Taros 3, the crops in Section 12 began dying. Cresseth noticed the discoloration that Sarah Chun had mentioned, but by then it was too late. The mineral deficiency had spread too far. She applied the standard fertilizer treatment from the agricultural database, which made the problem worse because the standard treatment was designed for Sethian homeworld soil, not for this colony's unique composition. Sarah had developed a custom fertilizer mixture specifically for Taros 3. She had documented the mixture, but she had not explained why certain ratios were critical or what would happen if the standard treatment was used instead. Cresseth followed her training and her documentation, but when faced with an unexpected problem, she reverted to what she had learned in agricultural school. 20% of Section 12's crop was lost. The colony's food surplus disappeared. They would need to import food until the next growing cycle, which meant using currency reserves they had planned to spend on infrastructure improvements. In Sector 4, the Vorlon-Sethian trade negotiations collapsed into accusations and threats. Cephthos, the Crithian diplomat who replaced David Okonkwo, had tried his best to mediate. He understood the theoretical frameworks of both cultures. But when the Vorlon minister made an aggressive statement, Cephthos responded with formal Crithian diplomatic language that the Vorlons interpreted as condescending. When the Sethian director tried to smooth things over with indirect suggestions, Cephthos missed the subtext entirely and thought they were changing the subject. The negotiations ended with both sides withdrawing their trade representatives. Commerce between the Vorlon industrial worlds and Sethian agricultural colonies, which had flowed smoothly for decades, ground to a halt. David Okonkwo had maintained that flow through personal relationships and cultural understanding that could not be transferred through training sessions. Velshar began receiving reports of problems across Council space. At first, they seemed like isolated incidents. A system failure here, an agricultural problem there, a diplomatic dispute somewhere else. The Council had managed such problems for centuries. They formed committees, allocated resources, and sent specialists to address each issue. But the problems kept multiplying. More stations reported life support issues. More colonies reported agricultural failures. More trade routes reported disruptions. The pattern was not obvious at first because the problems were different in each location. A Vorlon station failed differently than a Crithian station. A Sethian colony had different problems than a Telkari colony. 4 months after the human withdrawal, Station Kaiser 7 experienced a catastrophic failure. The cascading stress on the life support systems finally exceeded all safety margins. Vecmer and his team had been working around the clock to patch problems, but they were always reacting to the immediate crisis without understanding the underlying patterns. At 0300 hours, the main coolant system ruptured. The backup systems, already strained beyond their design limits, could not compensate. Temperature in the station's core began rising. Emergency protocols activated automatically, but the evacuation procedures were designed for single-section failures, not station-wide emergencies. 200,000 people needed to evacuate within 6 hours. The station had transport capacity for 50,000 at a time. Council emergency response teams scrambled to send additional ships, but the nearest vessels were 8 hours away. Leanne, the human who had coordinated emergency responses for Sector 9, had spent years developing rapid evacuation procedures for large stations. She had worked with every species to understand their different evacuation behaviors. She had pre-positioned emergency supplies and transport capacity based on complex models of failure scenarios. When she left, she had documented the procedures, but the documentation did not include the reasoning behind the prepositioning or the prepositioning or the documentation did not include the reasoning behind the prepositioning behind the prepositioning or the braver species-specific communication protocols. The new coordinator, a Telkari named Resh, followed the standard evacuation procedures from the Council Emergency Handbook. Those procedures worked well for small-scale emergencies. They were overwhelmed by the scale of Kaiser 7's failure. The evacuation became a disaster. In the panic, different species responded in different ways. The Vorlons formed orderly lines and waited their turn, which meant they moved too slowly. The Sethians tried to help each other but created bottlenecks. The Telkari scattered in all directions, seeking individual escape routes. Communication broke down as translation systems failed under the stress. 3,000 people died. Most were crushed in the stampedes or trapped in sections where the life support failed completely. Some died in transport accidents as overwhelmed pilots made mistakes. The youngest victim was 6 years old, a Vorlon child. The oldest was 342 years old, a member of the ancient historian species. The news of Kaiser 7 reached the Galactic Council like a shockwave. Velshara convened an emergency session. The council chamber, usually a place of calm deliberation, erupted in accusations and recriminations. The Vorlon representatives blamed the Krithian administrators for inadequate oversight. The Krithians blamed the Telkari emergency coordinators for poor execution. The Sethians blamed everyone for not working together better. Each species saw the failure through their own cultural lens and found fault in other species' approaches. Archon Temos, a representative of the ancient historian species, listened to the arguments for 3 hours. He was old, even by historian standards, and he had served on the council for 200 years. He rarely spoke during sessions, preferring to observe and record. Finally, he raised one manipulator appendage, a gesture that commanded silence through sheer respect for his age and wisdom. "You were all asking the wrong question," he said, his voice thin and reedy, but carrying clearly through the translation system. "You ask who failed. You should ask what we lost." He projected data onto the council chamber's main screen. Lists of numbers, personnel records, duty assignments. 11,241 humans resigned 6 months ago. I have spent these months studying what they did. These humans we barely noticed. They were not in military command or diplomatic corps or scientific leadership. They maintained machines, grew food, coordinated logistics, mediated minor disputes. Simple work, we thought. He paused, letting the data scroll across the screen. But I have analyzed the pattern of failures since their departure. Every major problem we now face correlates to a position previously held by a human. They were not doing simple work. They were solving thousands of small incompatibilities between our species every single day. Problems so minor that none of us reported them, but cumulatively catastrophic. The council chamber fell silent. Velshara stared at the data, her blue scales darkening with the Krithian expression of deep shame. "We took them for granted," Archon Temos continued. "We thought they were easily replaceable because we did not understand what they were actually doing. We thought we were civilized because we had 300 years of peace. But we were civilized because 11,000 humans worked every day to bridge the gaps between us." He looked around the chamber at all 47 species. "Now, we must the diplomatic vessel arrived at Earth 3 weeks after the Kaiser 7 disaster. It was a beautiful ship, constructed by the finest Vorlon engineers and decorated with artistic elements from all 47 council species. The vessel represented everything the Galactic Council believed about itself: cooperation, sophistication, unity. Velshara led the delegation. Beside her walked Ambassador Kethran, a Vorlon known for his negotiating skills. and Minister Sorovex, a Sethian chosen for her empathetic communication style. Behind them came technical experts, economic advisors, and cultural liaisons. The council had sent its best. They expected to be received at Earth's capital, in grand governmental chambers with all the ceremony that such an important negotiation deserved. Instead, their transport brought them to a modest office building in the administrative district of Geneva. The building was old by human standards, made of stone and glass, surrounded by actual trees growing in natural soil. A single human waited for them in a plain conference room. Her name was Sarah Chan, and Velshara recognized her from the personnel files as the agricultural specialist, who had worked on Colony World Taros 3. She wore simple business clothing and sat at a normal table with a datapad in front of her. "Welcome to Earth," Sarah said. Her tone was neither warm nor cold, simply professional. "Please, sit down." Velshara felt off balance. She had prepared for many possible scenarios, angry confrontations, emotional appeals, perhaps even attempts at intimidation. She had not prepared for this quiet normalcy. "We appreciate your willingness to meet with us," Velshara began, using the formal diplomatic opening she had rehearsed. "The Galactic Council deeply regrets the circumstances that led to your departure and wishes to discuss terms for your return." Sarah nodded. "I understand. Before we discuss terms, I would like to share some information with you." She activated the conference room's projection system. Data appeared on the wall, organized in clear columns and charts. "These are the requisition requests humans filed over the past 50 years, Sarah said. Requests for better safety equipment, upgraded monitoring systems, additional personnel to reduce hazardous shift lengths, improve living conditions on frontier stations. 11,467 requests total. Denied, 11,103. Approved, 364, mostly for equipment that benefited non-human personnel as well. Velshara looked at the numbers. She remembered reviewing many such requests, including the one from Kaiser 7 that Marcus Webb had filed. At the time, they had seemed unreasonable. Humans asking for expensive upgrades to systems that were functioning adequately. These requests were denied due to budget constraints, Velshara said. The Council must allocate resources across thousands of worlds and stations. "I understand," Sarah said. "Here is more information." New data appeared. Mortality statistics, broken down by species and occupation. Human mortality rates in Council employment were 4.3 times higher than the galactic average. Injury rates were 6.7 times higher. This is because humans work disproportionately in hazardous positions. Deep space maintenance, frontier agricultural development, emergency response, infrastructure repair. The positions other species found too dangerous or too uncomfortable. She pulled up another chart. Compensation analysis. Humans earned an average of 60% of what other species earned for equivalent work. When we raised this issue, the Council's response was that human economic needs were different, that Earth's cost of living was lower. But humans working on Council stations did not live on Earth. We paid the same prices for food and housing as everyone else. Ambassador Cathran spoke up, his Vorlon voice carrying the tone of reasoned argument. "These are valid concerns, and the Council is prepared to address them. We propose a 40% increase in human compensation, upgraded safety equipment for all hazardous positions, and reduction of shift lengths to standard galactic work schedules. We also propose," Minister Sorovex added in her gentle Sethian way, "formal human representation on the Galactic Council. 2 seats, equal to any other member species. Your voices will be heard on all policy decisions." Sarah listened to the proposals without interruption. When they finished, she pulled up another set of data. "These are personal stories," she said. Marcus Webb, Station Kaiser 7. His daughter died of cancer. He took his station posting to pay medical bills. He asked for shift reduction so he could spend more time with his dying child. Via communication link. Denied. He asked for emergency leave to attend her funeral. Approved, but unpaid, and his position was threatened if he stayed away more than 4 days. She scrolled to the next entry. David Okonkwo, Sector 4 Mediator. Developed respiratory problems from exposure to atmospheric contaminants during a diplomatic crisis on a Telkari world. Asked for medical reassignment to a world with human-compatible atmosphere. Denied. Told to purchase breathing apparatus with his own funds or resign. Liu Yan, Emergency Response Coordinator. Lost her entire team in a rescue operation when requested safety equipment had not been approved. Filed formal complaint about the decision chain that led to their deaths. Complaint dismissed. She was told the deaths were unfortunate, that the risk was inherent to emergency response work. Sarah looked up from the datapad. Her expression had not changed, but something in her eyes made Valshara feel uncomfortable. I could show you 2,847 more stories like these. Formal complaints filed, dismissed, or ignored. Humans who died because adequate safety measures were not actually adequate for human physiology. Humans who sacrificed relationships, health, and sometimes lives because the council needed their work but did not value their well-being. The conference room was very quiet. Valshara felt something unfamiliar. Shame that went deeper than professional embarrassment. Shame that touched something fundamental about how she had understood the world. "We are prepared to make amends," she said. "What are your terms?" Sarah set down her datapad. "Ambassador, I think you misunderstand the situation. You are here to negotiate what you think we want. Better pay, better conditions, council representation. These are all things we should have had already, not bargaining chips for our return. Then what do you want?" Ambassador Catherine asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "We want something we cannot negotiate for," Sarah said simply. "We want to not be taken for granted. We want our work to be seen and valued. We want to be treated as equals, not as convenient labor that can be dismissed when we ask for basic dignity." "We acknowledge our failure," Minister Sorovek said. "We did not see your contributions. We see them now. Is that not enough?" "You see them now because we left," Sarah responded. "You see them now because stations failed and people died. You see them now because your systems collapsed. That is not the same as seeing them when we were there, doing the work, asking for reasonable conditions." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the trees and the old stone buildings. "When I was on Taurus 3, I spent 6 months developing a crop rotation system that saved that colony. I asked for proper research equipment to test soil samples. I was told to make do with what was available. I asked for an assistant because the work was too much for one person. I was told the budget did not allow it. I did the work anyway because people needed to eat." She turned back to face the delegation. "I did not do that work because I expected gratitude. I did it because it needed to be done, and I had the skills to do it. But when the colony succeeded, the credit went to Sethian agricultural techniques. When I asked for equipment, I was told I was demanding too much. When I left, nobody thanked me for those 6 months. They assigned someone else and expected the work to continue. We are thanking you now, Valshara said. We are offering you everything you asked for. You are offering compensation, Sarah said. That is not the same as respect. Respect is not given because it is expedient. Respect is given because you recognize the inherent worth and dignity of the people doing the work. She sat back down at the table. Humanity has new terms for working in council space. We will work as independent contractors only. We set our own rates based on market demand. We have full control over our safety protocols. We maintain our own oversight and reporting structures. We are not employees of the Council or any member species. We are partners, or we are nothing. Ambassador Catherine stood up abruptly. This is extortion. You are taking advantage of a crisis. Sarah met his gaze calmly. No, Ambassador. This is us valuing ourselves the way you never did. You are welcome to solve your problems without us. We learned from the Council. We learned that we can survive on our own. We built our own infrastructure, our own economy, our own systems during the centuries we worked for you. She gestured to the data still displayed on the wall. The question you should be asking is not whether you can afford our terms. The question is whether you can afford to continue without us. How many more stations will fail? How many more colonies will struggle? How many more people will die in emergencies that could have been prevented? Valshara looked at the human woman, this agricultural specialist who spoke with such quiet certainty. She thought about Marcus Webb and his Modi. 5 years after Protocol Exodus, Marcus Webb stood in the maintenance bay of Station Hope, watching a young Crithian engineer named Sevkal work on Pump 7. The station had a new name now, changed after the disaster that killed 3,000. The old designation, Kaiser 7, had been retired as a memorial. What do you notice about the temperature reading? Marcus asked. Sevkal checked his diagnostic tool. It shows within normal parameters. 0.2 degrees above optimal, but well within acceptable range. And what does the pump itself tell you? Sevkal placed his hand on the pump housing, feeling the vibration. He closed his eyes, concentrating. After a moment, he opened them and looked at Marcus with concern. The vibration pattern is wrong. It is running 3 degrees hotter than the sensor indicates. Marcus smiled. Good. Now you are learning. Sensors are tools, but they are not truth. Your experience is truth. Your hands and your instincts are truth. The sensor is calibrated incorrectly and has been for 17 years. The manufacturer discontinued the correct model. I could have replaced the entire pump assembly, but that would cost 2 million credits and shut down this section for a week. So you learn to ignore the sensor, Sevkal said. No, Marcus corrected. I learned to understand what the sensor was really telling me. The incorrect reading is consistent. It always reads 3 degrees lower than actual temperature. Once you know that pattern, the sensor becomes useful again. This was why Marcus had come back. Not for the money, though the new contract paid him 4 times what the Council had offered before. Not for the position, though he now held the title of Chief of Operations with real authority and resources. He came back to teach, to pass on the knowledge that could not be written in manuals. The Council had spent 2 years trying to fix its problems alone. They had formed committees and task forces. They had developed new procedures and training programs. They had allocated massive budgets to upgrade infrastructure and safety systems. Some things improved. Many things did not. The fundamental problem remained. No amount of procedure could replace experience. And no amount of training could replace understanding that came from working at the intersection of different species and systems. The Council species had evolved to work within their own frameworks. Humans had evolved to adapt to any framework. Finally, the Council had accepted Earth's terms. Humans would return as independent contractors. They would set their own rates. They would maintain their own oversight. They would work as partners, not as subordinates. Not all humans returned. Many had started new lives in human-controlled space and saw no reason to go back. But enough returned. Marcus came back because Station Hope needed him and because he had unfinished business with Pump 7. Sarah Chun came back to Colony World Taurus 3 because she wanted to see if her crop rotation system had survived. David Okonkwo came back to Sector 4 because he had spent 12 years building relationships that he did not want to waste. On Taurus 3, Sarah walked through the agricultural fields with Cresseth, the Sethian who had replaced her 5 years ago. The colony had struggled after Sarah left. Crop yields had dropped 40%. They had imported food for 2 growing cycles, depleting their economic reserves. The colony nearly failed. Then Sarah came back, not as an employee, but as an independent agricultural consultant. She worked with Cresseth, not as supervisor to subordinate, but as colleagues solving a problem together. It took 8 months to restore the crop rotation system. It took another year to rebuild the soil health. Now the fields were green again, and the colony had surplus to trade. "I thought I understood your system," Cresseth said as they examined Section 12, where the crops grew thick and healthy. "I followed all your documentation, but I did not understand why each step was necessary. When problems arose, I did not know which steps I could change and which were critical." "That is because I did not explain it properly," Sarah admitted. "I documented what to do, but not why to do it. I thought the procedures were enough. I was wrong." They stopped at the irrigation control station. Sarah pointed to the humidity settings. "You see this 0.3% difference I mentioned? It matters because of the specific atmospheric pressure on this world. The plants need exactly this amount of moisture in the air to properly absorb nutrients from the soil. Too little, and the roots cannot process the minerals. Too much, and fungal growth begins." "But how did you discover this?" Cresseth asked. "It is not in any agricultural database." "By failing," Sarah said simply. "I lost 12% of a crop when I got the humidity wrong. I tested different levels for 3 growing cycles. I studied how the plants responded. I learned from mistakes." She looked at the younger Sethian. "This is what I teach you now. Not just the correct procedures, but how to discover procedures when facing something new. How to experiment. How to fail safely and learn from failure. This is what your agricultural training did not teach you, because Sethian agriculture on Sethian worlds does not require it. Your methods work perfectly on your own worlds. But here, you need something different." In Sector 4, David Okonkwo sat in a negotiation room with the Vorlon Trade Minister and the Sethian Commerce Director. Beside him sat Sefthos, the Crithian diplomat who had replaced him 5 years ago. The room was familiar. The participants were familiar. Even the dispute was familiar. Tariff rates on manufactured goods. But the atmosphere was different. Sefthos had spent 5 years learning what David already knew. That successful diplomacy between species required more than understanding theoretical cultural frameworks. It required personal relationships, trust built over time, and the ability to see beneath surface statements to underlying concerns. "Minister Kaltok," David said to the Vorlon, "you say you need higher tariffs to protect your industrial base. But what is your real concern?" "I think it is not about protecting existing industries, but about maintaining employment for workers whose skills are becoming obsolete." The Vorlon minister stiffened, then relaxed slightly. "You always did see too much, Okonkwo." "Yes. We have 3 million workers trained in traditional manufacturing. If we cannot compete with cheaper imports, these workers lose their livelihoods." David turned to the Sethian director. "And Director Mesitha, you want lower tariffs to access cheaper goods. But your real concern is that your colonies cannot afford current prices and maintain infrastructure investments at the same time." The Sethian made a gesture of acknowledgement. "Your insight remains sharp. Yes, we must choose between affordable goods for our people, or building the infrastructure that would make us less dependent on imports." "Then perhaps," David suggested, "the solution is not about tariff rates, but about a worker retraining program funded jointly by both sides. Vorlon workers learn new skills. Sethian colonies gain the expertise to build their own production facilities. Both sides invest in long-term solutions rather than short-term protectionism. Seftos watched the conversation with admiration. This was what he had struggled to achieve for 5 years, seeing past the stated positions to the real needs underneath. David made it look effortless, but Seftos now understood it was not effortless at all. It was the result of years of careful observation, relationship building, and the willingness to address uncomfortable truths. After the meeting, Seftos walked with David through the commercial district. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you see what others hide?" "I do not see what they hide," David said. "I see what they show, but do not realize they are showing. Every species communicates their true concerns, but they do it differently. Vorlons do it through body language. Did you notice how Kaltok's shoulders were tense? That told me his concern was about protecting people, not just economics. Sethians do it through word choice, mess. Itha used the word infrastructure 4 times, which told me that was her real focus. But how did you learn these patterns?" "By making mistakes," David said. "By saying the wrong thing and watching negotiations fall apart. By spending time with people informally, learning how they think. By being willing to fail and try again." He stopped and looked at Seftos. "This is what I want to teach you. Not just what I know, but how to learn what you do not know yet. Because every negotiation is different. Every relationship is unique. You cannot follow a procedure for this. You must develop judgment." In the Galactic Council chambers, Valshara presented our annual report on human integration. 5 years after the Exodus, the situation had stabilized. Humans were back in critical positions across Council space. Infrastructure failures had decreased by 80%. Agricultural output had returned to pre-Exodus levels. Trade disputes were being resolved more quickly and effectively, but the relationship had changed fundamentally. Humans were no longer invisible workers that the Council barely noticed. They were recognized partners who commanded respect and appropriate compensation. The cost to the Council was higher. The efficiency was better. "We have learned an expensive lesson," Valshara told the assembled representatives. "We learned that civilization is not maintained by grand gestures or sophisticated systems alone. It is maintained by the people who do the unremarkable work that makes everything else possible." She displayed a holographic memorial that now stood in the Council chambers.